So this is episode number 8 of the $1 Million Case Study. It's crazy to me how quickly these are going. So if you're just tuning in, I imagine most of you now have already seen some, but we found a good opportunity on Amazon. We found baby hooded towels. That's what we decided to sell. We found a supplier. We've been communicating with the supplier. I've put down a deposit. We actually just finished our packaging and sent over the design to them yesterday. And it's getting to be about the point in a few weeks where the production run is going to be done in China, and we're going to need to ship these goods from China to the distribution centers in the US. So with that being said, I'm really excited to have our guest on today. This is Philip, who's the head of the marketplaces at Freightos. He also has a PhD in the shipping and freight industry. So I couldn't think of a better person to have on during this webinar. So that being said, Philip, what's up? Welcome.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having us here on your amazing challenge, the $1 Million Challenge. We're super excited. Well, yeah, so I was working for 15 years in the logistics industry, and it's pretty, as a lot of you know, pretty like old school. If you have any quotation, anything that you need to get from A to B, you usually wait like for 2-3 days until a shipment goes. If it's super urgent and you, for example, have an air shipment, you want it to be there in 2-3 days and not wait for an offer for this time. So that's why after 15 years, I left the old school shipping industry and joined the startup Freightos, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about in the coming slides, and try to revolutionize it. We try to basically make it faster and efficient, and especially more transparent, so that you immediately know and instantly know how much your freight will cost you. Very good, great. You see these nice bikes and the pineapples there.
That's right.
And what we love to do is basically that we're not talking about containers, we're not talking about freight terms, we're talking about actually the goods that are in the containers. So that's very important, because it's all about the actual goods that you want to bring from A to B. So Greg said in the earlier $1 Million Challenge webinar, I think it was number 6. So if you break it down, shipping is not that super complicated. None of this is too complicated until you try to take too much information. So what we're doing in this webinar is that we focus only on those elements that you really need to take possession or take knowledge of. There are a lot of things which are a lot common sense, that I'm not focusing on. I'm only focusing on the things you really need to know, which are a little bit more trickier. Okay, so Greg, just stop me if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'm jumping already to the next slide.
Yep, we'll do.
Okay, all right, perfect. So what I'm gonna do, what I'm gonna take you to is, first of all, we're already in the middle of the introduction. I take you through what's necessary for getting everything together for before shipping things out. Then I'll take you through what's very important to get a quote, simply because you need not only to tell the provider, the forwarder, or the logistics company about the weight and the volume, but some other information that are very essential that you probably won't know when importing the first, second, or third time. The third thing is that I show you a little bit about the process, the delivery, and then go into questions and answers. Okay, so let's dive in. First of all, a little bit about Freightos. Freightos is a marketplace similar to Kayak. If you're from Europe, something a little bit about Swoodoo. If you don't have Swoodoo or don't know about Kayak, it's similar to Expedia, where you can log in, you describe your shipment in terms of volume and in terms of weight, and from where to where it is going. And then within usually 10 seconds, we can give you different quotes from at least 3 different providers. Freightos is not a forwarder ourselves, but we'll guide you through the shipping process very seamlessly. So afterwards, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take you a little bit more through what Freightos is. And generally, Freightos is the online marketplace for freight. Okay, so let's dive in. What we want to understand first is, are your goods really freightable, or are they debatable? And what means debatable? There are three major sections which make the goods debatable. The first one is basically if it's customs, if customs lets you through or not. And that is very, very tricky because not very obvious. Things that basically are customs restricted are goods which have items on that you cannot import. And there are lots of sites. If you are looking into goods that are not importable, you can either easily Google it or come to freightos.com. And on Freightos, we usually have we have a little bit of a section about which shipments are good to go or not. However, even if customs lets them through, there are goods which are under control by other US agencies. For example, sunglasses, you wouldn't know, are controlled by the Food and Drug Administration. Or when you import something with leather, the Fish and Wildlife Administration is looking at it. So before selecting any goods that you're importing, you want to check about any trade-related items, any trade-compliant items before importing the goods. Then if you are clean and good to go, if you say, okay, this is a safe item, you want to look into if air ocean carriers are actually good in importing these goods. Why I'm saying this is, for example, a lot of goods have lithium batteries in it, and air carriers often do not allow lithium batteries at a certain size to import. For example, if you've selected power bars, which are these battery bars, which are very trendy at the moment. Most of them are at a size that you cannot import them in bulk via air, so you need to import them via ocean, and also there are upper limits. So you want to check before coming in, either at freightos.com or on Google, if they're actually importable. And the last item, but this was mostly covered in the fourth webinar in the series already, if the Department of Commerce has basically banned any products that are coming in. So even if you selected it and before shipping, check if you can easily import them into the United States. Okay, great. So the last item, once you made a selection, usually your factory gives you a HS code, which is a harmonized tariff code. And the first digits are internationally harmonized. However, the last ones are specific per country. So ask for the US harmonized tariff code. It's called HS or HTS code. By your factory in China, they usually have it. And then go to freightos.com or another site to calculate your duties, because the duties vary quite a bit. And sometimes you have not to pay any duties in it. Sometimes they vary and go up to 10–15%. So if you have a slim margin on your products, they can crush just the duties and taxes you have to pay to US customs. They can crush your margins pretty heavily. So just make sure to take this before selecting your product. With that, we want to focus a little bit on the Incoterms. The Incoterms are quite difficult to understand, actually. Why is it? Because they have this is an international standard for standards for who's paying for the freight and who's taking the risk over the goods themselves when importing. And I'm only taking you through 3 or 3.5 Incoterms that are usually the usual ones when importing, especially from China into the United States. The first one is EXW, and it stands for Ex Works. Ex Works means that everything, the freight as well as the risk, are up on you when importing from China from the factory onwards. That means you are responsible for paying the carrier, paying the freight forwarder right from the dock from your factory. And if anything breaks afterwards, you are responsible for it. So Ex Works, EXW, is the Incoterm. And when you get an offer from your supplier in China, from the factory, very often when you see it, these 3 letters make quite a difference in the later cost. Because if it's selected, if they offer it to you EXW, you have to pay additional cost for freight. When it comes to FOB, which is the most common term, FOB stands for free on board. This means that the factory is delivering the goods either to the airport or to the ocean port. And they usually don't deliver it straight to the airline or to the alongside the plane or the ship. They usually deliver it to the warehouse. So when the factory is asking you, does your forwarder, does your logistics company have a warehouse in China? Then this is the answer. The answer is yes. There is a consolidation warehouse of all the forwarders that have it in China from a forwarder, and they can deliver it to this warehouse and then consolidate it with other goods together, ship it to the United States. The last one is CDU or DDP, which stands for delivers duties, delivered duty unpaid or delivered duty paid, which means that you don't have to pay any freight charges. You don't take the risk of any of the delivery. And the U and the P differentiates that the factory will pay the duties in the United States, or you still have to pay the duties and taxes to U.S. Customs in the United States or in any other country. So it's often your supplier, if you ask them to make a better offer, they are able to make a better offer. But however, what they do is they just change the Incoterms. So be very careful when ask them for a better offer, and then compare the Incoterms from the former to the latter quote and see if anything has changed. Another tip is that the factory often can organize trucks within China very cheaply. However, they upcharge quite a bit for the international delivery. So ask them if you want to lower the quote, if they can make you an offer instead of DDU or DDP, if they can make you an offer for FOB, meaning that the factory sends the goods to the warehouse in China, and then you pay and organize the goods from then onwards. So the other benefit from this is that you take control of the shipment, meaning you know when it's coming. You don't rely on your Chinese forwarder to deliver it to you. So that is usually the best Incoterm. That's also the most common Incoterm. And then again, at freightos.com, you can play around with different costs that you have from FOB or XWorks. The next thing you need to be very careful about is about the packaging. And I posted there 2 different examples just of candles of a furniture store you might know. And you see that the packaging might make quite a difference, especially in air freight. In air freight, you can take the thumb rule that 600 kilograms is equal to 1 cubic meter. And what you want to be aware of, or what you want to avoid, is actually to ship air. Shipping just air is lost money, is wasted money. So be very careful that when you ship the goods, that your packaging is as efficient as possible. And sometimes you would think, oh, but you want to present it in a certain way to the customer. Then think about maybe you want to adjust it in the United States, or if you can just basically reduce the amount of air that's shipped. Okay, so avoid excessive packaging if it just adds cost. If you can, palletize the shipments after the customs clearance once it's in the United States, not before, so you don't pay for pallets shipped. Double box fragile products so that basically nothing breaks there, and clearly mark cartons and boxes so that they're identifiable, because they cannot speak. And when when the goods stand in the warehouse and they don't have a label on it, they don't know where to go, then it's very good that they basically have the marking where it's going to, where it's coming from, for which company. Very, very important is that, especially if you're importing from low labor cost countries, pilferage is a common topic. So just make sure that you don't have any brand identification on your boxes. Usually they are in brown color, and so just some general marking for the address is usually the most useful. Greg, any questions about packaging?
So regarding pallets, Philip, aren't there other issues with shipping your products already palletized from China that has to do with like the wood?
Yeah, good question. Wooden pallets need to be fumigated in the United States, and it's actually not too complicated. What it means is that either already fumigated pallets will be used, or goods or the container will be fumigated in the United States upon entry. So just be aware that there might be an extra charge from fumigating this when you ship goods in on pallets in an ocean container.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I've always palletized once it got stateside. That would be what's the most common, right? Just to, like you said, don't use the packaging, just fill the container all over the goods and then palletize once it gets into the States or wherever you're shipping.
Exactly, that's the most common thing, especially since ocean freight is usually not that time sensitive. You do not need to palletize them in China already.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right, so let's move over and let's get to the next stage, which is basically which modes to select. And it's very interesting because you always think like, ocean freight is the cheapest and courier like DHL and UPS is the most expensive. However, this is not always the case. If you have something under 50 kilo, or what is that, like 100 pounds, something like this, then usually using UPS, DHL Express is the cheapest mode of transport. You can, as a rule of thumb, you can work with $7 per kilogram. When you check the actual rates, you might have chances that it's cheaper. I just wanted to give you this as a rule of thumb to calculate with. It usually takes between 3 to 5 days from door to door to get from China to the United States. And the costs are highly variable. They all are per kilogram. So when you have a small sample, for example, if you start with sampling, you want to start with that to get the sample relatively fast and use the cheapest mode of transport for this way. Once you get into the next stage, having a test order, or if you need it relatively fast, or if you have goods that are usually shipments that are below 500 kilograms, that's really a rule of thumb, then you want to be you're best off with air freight. There you have moderate fixed costs, which means that you have an average, you pay $4 or $5 per kilogram somewhere from China to the United States. And however, you have fixed cost for transportation. If you have to pick it up from the factory, you have the fixed cost with the truck, which usually doesn't matter how much is on the truck, and then you have the delivery. It's not fully fixed, but you have the custom entry that is fixed. You always pay. So it doesn't really matter if you have $1 more, 1 kilogram more or less. What matters is basically the bulk changes between 50 and 500 kilogram. And the same applies then for ocean freight. In ocean freight, you pay around 60 cents per kilogram. It takes between 30 and 40 days. It really depends if you're going to the West Coast, to the East Coast, or somewhere within the country. However, if you sometimes double the amount of ocean freight, or double the amount of volume you're going to ship, oftentimes the rates, the costs don't go up that much, especially if you're getting into container. If you fill the container by 60, 70, 80, 90%, there is no change in cost simply because you get the full container by your own. And you can play around with this with the different charges also on freightos.com. So you can always you always have within these air freight or ocean freight options different variances in transit times. So sometimes there is a faster, more direct air freight available, or slower indirect air freight. The same applies for ocean freight. So just play around with it a little bit and see where the variances are. But this is basically a general guidance for your mode of transport. Greg, any questions that came up?
No, that's really good. I know everyone always has questions like how much, are there any general rules of thumbs that I could use, like to estimate the cost of this? I really appreciate you putting some general rules of thumb on that slide. That's great.
Okay, great. Very good. So let's jump to the next question. Actually, what do you need for a quote? And that's quite often, basically, we get these questions. Hey, I need to ship 5 cartons from China to the US. Well, the question is, where in China and where to the US? And what are 5 cartons, right? So the first thing is, if you have a zip code in China, that usually helps a lot, because actually the clear determinator. You only need a zip code. Usually rates don't vary within a zip code. The same applies for the US. If you have a zip code in the United States, that's fully sufficient. If you have a town, you only need the address at a very late later stage. Then obviously 5 cartons, every forwarder, also on our side, we will ask you what is the weight of each carton, right? Because if you ship a carton that has 10 kilo, 20 kilo, or if you have a carton that is 500 kilo, then it makes quite a difference. What we usually see is that the average carton size, what's sold on for packages that are produced for Amazon from Chinese factories, are between 7 and 15 kilos. So if you have small goods, then they packages in larger lot sizes. So usually a carton is between 7 and 15 kilos, and you will receive it on a so-called packing list, where you see how many goods are in each carton. On this packing list is also the dimensions, and these can vary quite a bit. So usually dimensions are given in centimeters. So they'll mix them up with inches, because in China they work with centimeters. So it's, when you have the packing list, usually the weight is in kilograms and the dimensions are in centimeters. So you have the zip code at origin, you have the zip code at destination, and the last thing you need to know is what's the value of the goods. Because, and we're going to come to this, if you need some insurance or if you need some bonds to import into the United States, it's very important to know the shipment value. And the shipment value doesn't matter what you're going to sell it for, only the value is important what you're going to buy it for. So if you buy it at $5 per piece, but you sell it for 15, only what matters are the 5, not matters are what the 15 are. So you get the dimensions, you get the weight of your total shipments, broken down per box. You get the zip code for origin, the zip code for destination, and the shipment value, and that's all you need to get a quote at the beginning. Any questions, Greg?
Real quick, there's kind of a recurring question here, and I think it stems around. Could you just speak about real quick, like the duties of a freight forwarder and the difference between freightos and a freight forwarder? I think for some people that's a little bit confusing.
Okay, great. Freight forwarder is like a travel agency where you go and they organize everything for you, like the hotel, like the rental car, and they send you then a full booking with the flights, the hotel, and the rental car. What freightos is basically a search engine for this, where you put in the dimensions, weights, the zip codes, and value, and freightos lists you different freight forwarders that have these options and lists you the prices with this. So if you're not sure which freight forwarder to go to, how much it is, freightos is a search engine and not a forwarder, and gives you the response with different freight forwarders.
Perfect. You did a very good job with the analogy there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Overall, maybe I haven't also explained this. You see it here in the screenshot that we post reviews for each freight forwarder. So here, 2 of the same. However, we list, you see here is agility in there. And when you click on the reviews, it's not reviews we put in there, but they are reviews from actual shippers. And you can click through, you see their names, and you see how they rate them in different sections, and some verbal explanations to it. So if you're not sure about a freight forwarder, if you've never heard about them, then just click on the reviews and you see what others posted. Okay. All right, let's go ahead. Unfortunately, sometimes ship happens, and unfortunately, the ocean carriers, meaning the actual airlines that transporting your goods, or an ocean carrier, same as the forwarders that are organizing the voyage for you, they only provide very, very basic and insufficient insurance. Usually the insurance that they provide, or the liability that they give you, is at $2 per kilogram. And if you ship ocean, especially heavy stuff, this is by far not sufficient. So we say cargo insurance is a must, especially as it's very, very cheap. It usually comes at 60 cents of each $100. So spend the extra 60 cents per each of $100, and you'll be well off if the goods are damaged, if the goods are stolen or lost. and you're far off and to have an insurance at the end. On freightos.com, you always can click the check mark. You want to include insurance, and all the rates that are given then include insurance at the same time. If you go to a freight forwarder directly, ask them for insurance, they're happy to include it. As a pro tip, only accept comprehensive cargo insurance. It will keep you covered, and it's totally worth the outlay. So make sure you insure yourself. Okay, Greg, any questions to that?
No, I have a few, but I'm going to save them for the end.
Okay, good, very good. So then the next one is basically you booked your shipment, you've included insurance, everything is good, you have your rate, what do you need next? It's quite messy if you import the first time. You expect to have about, at the end, about 10 to 20 several documents on your desk or that you're dealing with. However, I'm going to list the 4 very standard ship documents that you need. The number one the document that you need is the commercial invoice. The commercial invoice is the invoice that you get from the factory. It lists usually what the value of the goods are, the invoice that you have to pay, who's selling it from your factory to you. Usually it states also the goods with an HS code, and then lots of other items, but that's usually what's needed. It's needed an ocean shipment very early on, 48 hours before departure of the ship. The reason for this is basically that for ocean shipments, the United States Customs and other agencies want to know what's coming to the United States. So they require a so-called ISF, a security filing, where the customs broker has to put in, or the freight forwarder has to put in what's being shipped to the United States, so that the agencies in the United States have a chance to review what's actually arriving a few days later via ship. So how do they do it? Basically, they take the commercial invoice and the details of the commercial invoice to declare what's coming to the United States. So don't wait until the last second to receive the final commercial invoice from the factory. Ask them very, very early on for the commercial invoice. The same applies for the packing list. The packing list lists what's in the container, what's being shipped. It lists the dimensions, the weight, it lists exactly the specifics, what items are being shipped, and that's very important. So these 2 items you want to have very, very clear, and make sure that if there's any mistake on it, you go back to the factory and ask them to correct it. The next item is the MSDS, the Material Safety Data Sheet. This is only needed when you have any hazardous goods, meaning any goods that have batteries in there, anything that is explosive, anything that is like ping pong balls, for example. You wouldn't believe, but they have some gas in there, and at a certain amount, they are actually explosive. So anything that's flammable, this is basically you need the MSDS for, and ask for it, because the specifics, the details really, really matter. The last item is if you've never imported before, or if you're importing with a new customs broker, you want to make sure that you give the power of attorney. And it's a form that you receive from your freight forwarder. Freightos also has power of attorneys ready for you. After your booking, you give to the power of attorney for declaring customs. You give this to the freight forwarder, and the freight forwarder then has the power of attorney to declare customs with you. So these are the 4 documents you really, really need very early on, and you make sure that, that there is no error, no spelling error, nothing on there, because even little small spelling errors can cost you high fines later on when there's a difference in customs clearance versus the commercial invoice. Greg, any questions?
So far, so good.
Okay, great. Very good. So while we're talking about customs, let's talk about the customs bond. And this is something very, very confusing. In order to import into the United States with any goods that are over $2,000 value, and the commercial invoice needs to be under $2,000 value, you need to have a bond. And the bond is required by US Customs. There are 2 types of bonds. The one bond is the continuous entry bond, and this is good for 12 months. And this is usually sold at a rate of about $500. If you're importing 4 or more times within 12 months, you're usually better off to buy a continuous entry bond at the very beginning and pay the $500. If you are not sure about importing for the future, and you just plan for 1 or 2 times, then you're better off using a single entry bond. And the single entry bond, it has a minimum usually of $50, and then it's about 0.5% of the goods value. So 50 cents for every $100 it costs the single entry bonds. And then there's usually, if you ship ocean, an additional bond for for ocean freight, which comes at $75. So expect at least to pay $125 for a bond to have to import to the United States. Something between $125 and $500 is your cost, depending on the goods value and how often you import. Okay, so what you shouldn't confuse it with is basically that the bond doesn't pay for your customs duty. The customs duty is assessed after you're importing. Meaning the goods are, sorry, before you're importing. Meaning that you need the bond very early on when you basically kick off and start with your shipment. You pay then the customs duties before the entry. The entry is usually done 4 days before the goods arrive in the port. At the port of arrival, and the freight broker, the freight forwarder, is also the customs broker. Usually, they will send you a customs entry form with the assessment of the duties. When you receive this, you usually cut a check to US Customs, and you send a copy of this to the customs broker. And the customs broker then will use this copy of the check to release the goods from customs so that they can be distributed either to the Amazon warehouse or to the warehouse you have selected, or if you're a small importer, even to your garage. So at air freight, this is usually done while the goods have departed, meaning it's a so-called wheels up clearance. When the flight literally has departed, then the goods will be cleared, and then it's a very, very short time frame to actually cut the check to the forwarder and then send a copy to US Customs and send a copy over. So then when the flight lands, there's no wait time, there is no fees assessed for storage when the goods, while the goods have to be released. So make sure you really, once you receive the assessment from the forwarder about the customs duties, that you're good to go. Okay. Any questions, Greg?
One question for you is, how does someone go about getting a customs bond?
Very simple. Ask the freight forwarder, or when purchasing at Freightos, just we have it directly on the first site on the website. Just click yes, I need a customs bond, and it will be included in the quotation.
Great. I'll also just add to this. I think a few people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now. You know, like, man, it's like a lot to think about. And at the end of the day, guys, this is why like we hire freight forwarders to handle this for you, right? Most of them seem like really willing to kind of like help you, like walk you through the process. You know, they'll say like, hey, do you have a customs bond? I'll be like, oh crap, I forgot about that. No, I don't. How can I get that? And they'll help you in that sort of thing. So that's why freight forwarders exist, you know, to help us with all these steps, because especially if it's your first time, it is a little bit of a, you know, complicated process.
Exactly. So not only, but the freight forwarders are usually the travel agents for freight. So if you don't know about a certain process, then ask your freight forwarder about any question that you have. We have a lot of information at freightos.com, especially for you guys importing to the United States for Amazon or other e-commerce platforms. Go to freightos.com, and there is usually there is a good knowledge base. Okay.
Excellent.
Good. So let's continue. Delivery. That's usually the last mile. You're super excited. Your goods have arrived in the United States. And now, what's now? There is a last mile for delivery. And this can be very, very slippery. You always want to build in a little buffer for delivery. If basically the forwarder tells you the transit time is 3 to 5 days, add another 2-3 days. If it says 30 days, add another 5 days into it. You always, something can go wrong. Although it's like your goods are only like 100 miles away, something can go wrong. And you ask your freight forwarder where the goods are, and they tell you it's just around the corner. So we've seen this multiple times. Don't rely on the information you get. Always build a little bit buffer so that you don't need it at the end. Also be very about the FBA receiving requirements. There is a way the pallets need to be built. There is a way the maximum height. The forwarders that are using, that are experienced in delivering to Amazon know about it. Just make sure you tell them you're delivering to an Amazon warehouse, and that they should basically follow the processes for Amazon, because there are certain processes, I'm not going to the detail here, that need to be followed. But usually it's about how the pallets are being built, and that an appointment needs to be set with the Amazon warehouse. So if you're shipping to multiple locations in the United States, consider like consolidating the shipments, sending it to one port first, and then have your forwarder splitting and delivering it separately. So this is usually the better way than having shipped everything separate. Any questions there?
No, that's great.
Okay, great. So, well, we're coming to an end already. We have a little bit of a present here for you. If you go to freightos.com/jungle scouts, you will see that we have promotional credit for you. If you have your first shipment, and that's worth more than $1,000 for your logistics, then you get $100 off. How you do this, just enter in the comment field Jungle Scouts, and then our team will take these $100 off after you made the purchase. So if you have any questions, come to Freightos Marketplace. We have a little bit chat box there. You can chat with us and ask us any questions. And yeah, happy to answer anything that you have, or come to our knowledge base on freightos.com.
Fantastic. Philip, thank you very much for that presentation. We appreciate the $100 off coupon as well. It's very generous of you guys. So I have a few questions for you guys. The first one I'm actually going to answer. There's a few questions in the chat box about like an FBA prep facility and UPC codes and all those types of things. Let me just tell you guys what I normally do and what we're doing for the $1 million case study. So our factory is going to be the one putting the the barcodes on our box. They're going to be printed on the box. We're not going to put a label on there. If you want to learn more about this, it's in the past webinars, so episode 7 of the $1 million case study. I go into great detail for this, but these units don't need to be prepped once they get to the US. My factory is doing all the prep with, you know, like I said, the barcode and anything else. Okay, so we don't have to ship this to a prep center. I'm also never going to touch the inventory. So as you imagine, this is being manufactured in China. My freight forwarder is going to get it from China to the US. And then from the freight forwarder, they're going to palletize the shipments and send them into the different distribution centers that Amazon requires me to do so, okay? So hopefully that clears it up. Philip, one question I have for you is it common for freight forwarders to palletize your shipments for you and to ship them to different distribution centers, or is that something that only some freight forwarders will do?
Yeah, not every forwarder is versed in it, so you just want to check either with us before using a freight forwarder on our website if they're versed with us. There are some aren't, so better check before. Also, if you're not going through Freightos, you really want to make sure and ask them some questions if they've done this before, and then they usually you get it very fast. You get the information when asking them to describe the process, and you get a feeling that they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay, great. I think there's still a little bit of confusion. I know you did a nice thorough job explaining this, but I think there's still a little bit of confusion specifically between EXW and FOB terms. Can you just explain that one more time just quickly?
Yeah, I'm going back to the slides.
Perfect.
So EXW is if your goods are being picked up from the factory, meaning you pay from the ramp of the factory in China. And FOB means free on board, is for the goods being delivered by your factory to the warehouse in the port, and to the warehouse in the port, and then you pay from the port onwards to the factory, sorry, to the location in the United States.
Okay, I've always, anytime I'm shipping ocean freight, I've always just asked for FOB terms. And when I've shipped like Courier Express a few times, I usually ask for EXW. Is that what you'd recommend? Am I doing the right thing there?
Yeah, EXW for courier is great, but both are interchangeable. The most common one is FOB. There is no a thumb rule there you can apply.
Okay, cool. Let me see. We have a couple other questions here. A few people ask, like, do we have to use a freight forwarder? I personally would call you crazy if you don't. Is it even possible to not use a freight forwarder and try to do this all yourself?
I mean, if you're shipping, like, let's say under 500 kilograms, and you use a courier, you can directly go to DHL, UPS. If you ship above, it will get really, really costly. Generally, the forwarder is negotiating much better rates than going to these companies, and they will give you a discount. If you're shipping more than 500 kilogram, literally you cannot go to the large airlines or to the ocean carriers and ship something, unless you're like an IKEA or a Walmart. And you have your own logistics department, but I assume you wouldn't listen to this webinar in this case. So generally, yes, go to a forwarder, and it's not that you pay them a large amount. Usually better off and you're cheaper than going to the courier services directly.
Yeah. Okay. So guys, yeah, just to simplify that. If you use like DHL or FedEx or one of those guys, like, you don't need it. Otherwise, just hire a freight forwarder. Like, if you're viewing this, there's like a lot involved without using one. So I always do, and yeah, definitely recommend for you guys do the same. I think we had a couple other questions. I'm just seeing if there's any ones that I missed here. So like, on freightos individual, there's still a little bit of confusion about, I think, like the service that like freightos can provide. And I know we specifically asked you guys that we didn't want this to be like a sales pitch, just educational material, and I really appreciate that. But I think this is a good opportunity because freightos is like a tremendous resource for finding freight forwarders. Can you just explain one more time? And I know I asked you this question earlier, but one more time, like, what is a freight forwarder? People are asking, like, well, how do I find a freight forwarder? Like, the answer to that is, like, Freightos is an excellent source for that, because it gives you all, shows you the different costs of all the freight forwarders. But can you just explain that one more time?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity here. What you're going to do is, once you know from your factory the approximate dimensions and weight of your goods and from where to where it's going, start playing around on freightos.com for the different rates. And you don't need to like hire a freight forwarder like a lawyer from the early beginning on. They actually will ask you exactly the same question than what you put in the website. Think about if you want to fly from the United States to Australia. You can go to a travel agent, but they will like congratulate you only when you tell them, I have far in the future, my plans are to fly to Australia. They will only like work with you when you say, okay, in around this time frame, I want to fly from the United States to Australia. And the same is with freight. You just know the approximate time frame, know the approximate dimensions and weight, and from one zip code to zip code, come to Freightos, and then you get listed different freight forwarders, and then we bring you in touch with them. You can book on Freightos, and then afterwards you get in touch with a freight forwarder.
Cool. Yeah, just for clarification, guys, we're not affiliated with Freightos. We don't get an affiliate payment or anything. We just appreciate Philip's knowledge, and I think it's also a tremendous resource for you guys to use if you are looking for a freight forwarder. So with that being said, I think we've answered most of these. I'll go ahead and ask this one last one. I know the answer. We'll give it to you, Philip. the question is about like inspecting products. And actually, I'll go ahead and give my take on it. So my take on it, guys, if you want to inspect your products, the time to do that is going to be at the factory in China. That's going to be the best time to inspect these products, because think if you're like trying to inspect them once they get to the States, it's going to be very hard to rectify any problems once they've already made it to the States, right? If they're still at the factory, there's still a chance for you to get these types of products fixed. Anything you'd like to add to that, Philip?
Yeah, no, I absolutely concur. People say, "Can I inspect it at the port in the United States?" Especially like with an ocean container or ocean shipments, you won't be able to see it because you won't have access to the port. And then if you arrange it with a forwarder to be delivered to Amazon, the forwarder warehouse are usually like pretty busy. And then going to the Amazon warehouse, you're much better off going to China and doing it there. Especially because there you have really the chance to change anything about it. If they are once in the United States and you find any errors, you already paid for the freight and there is very little you can do about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, Philip, thank you very much for all that. Someone at the beginning of the webinar asked to see our packaging. So just real quickly, guys, I tried. If you watched the webinar last week, we talked about creating our packaging. So this is, I couldn't actually find the final proof, but it basically looks like this. This is what the front of our packaging is going to look like. So it's Jungle Snugs. I think it turned out like really cute. It should do really well. So these are just boxes that each of these, the hooded baby towels will be in. I couldn't find a picture of the back just in the short time I had during this webinar, but on the back, you will find the barcode. You'll find the made in China. It goes to our website. We did decide on the brand name Jungle Snug. So whoever in the audience recommended that when we asked you last week in the chat box, thank you very much for that. I guess we'll have to give you a free Jungle Snug for recommending the name. And with that being said, guys, the only other thing I have to say is we'll be doing another webinar next week. So next week, we are going to talk about getting set up on Amazon, some of the things that a lot of people might not realize. With Amazon, we're going to help walk you through that process. And we're going to be doing all this while we're waiting for our package, our shipment of our new product to arrive to Amazon in the US. And guys, if you just do me one favor also before we go, if you're finding these helpful and useful and you enjoy them, could you please subscribe to our YouTube channel? So to get there, if you're already watching it on YouTube, there should be a subscribe button somewhere down there. If you're watching it on our website, you can click through on the bottom right-hand side. The huge benefit for just subscribing on YouTube is we're going to start doing some short little quick videos. These aren't going to be like sent out to our email list, but instead just whoever subscribed to our channel will get to see these. So like when we get to see the Jungle Snugs for the first time, I'm just going to pull out my phone and shoot a little quick video so you guys can see it and that sort of thing. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you do not miss those. With that being said, thanks again, Philip. We greatly appreciate it. That was a wealth of information. So yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your product. Super exciting.
All right, take care, guys. See you next week. Bye.